On Labor this week, all the latest numbers and what your government is planning to do about it, the crisis in job-based medical insurance, and I'll have some thoughts on universal basic income. That and more as Labor this week begins now. Hello, I'm Mark Harrison, and let's get right to it. To say unemployment is off the charts is no longer just a saying. They have literally had to reimagine the charts. Claims by late next week will show an excess of 35 million people filing for unemployment, with some estimates saying an additional 12 million are out of work and unable to file because of government restrictions or have simply given up trying to get through. There is no place to hide. The crisis that began in hospitality and moved to travel and tourism quickly moved to construction, manufacturing, and retail. Lawyers are out of work to some extent, and some corporations are in full-on panic mode about steep financial losses. Even the once safe healthcare industry is laying off workers as doctor and dental offices see few or no patients, and elective surgery has been put on hold. Doctors are considering closing their practices, and the pilot shortage that was reaching desperate proportions for the airlines is now just a distant memory. But now, as discussions in Washington turn to how to reopen the economy, politics loom large in a presidential election year, and the blame game is accelerating and quickly coming up to full speed as competing factions race toward a November decision. The Paycheck Protection Program ran out of money, was doubled, and has run out of money again. That money, which was slated to keep workers on payrolls, will end in some places as soon as May 29th. The expanded unemployment benefit of $600 a week will end at the end of July. And the one-time payment of $1,200 was just that, a one-time payment. Talk of a V-shaped economy recovery to the economy is morphing into one of a U-shaped recovery with the bottom of the letter becoming wider with each passing day. The Congressional Budget Office thinks economic growth will begin this summer, while Moody's Analytics doesn't see a full jobs recovery until sometime in 2023. Democrats are arguing that the partial bridge to a quick recovery that the administration built will need to continue until we see a recovery solidly in place, while Republicans in Congress are growing increasingly skittish about taking on any new debt. Meanwhile, the right-wing fringe that has been financing the state reopening protests, complete with lots of Confederate flags and guns, are preparing to switch causes to no more public assistance. Tell them you heard it first at the Labor Network when it all happens. All the while, the private payroll service firm ADP has said that it estimates that 40% of the businesses that you now see closed will remain so permanently. Indeed, the decisions that are being made in the nation's capital now and in the coming weeks will have life-altering effects on all of us. Let's hope they're the correct ones. We'll be right back with a look at the medical insurance crisis. It is estimated that between 12 and 35 million people will lose their job-based health insurance because of the current financial crisis brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic. That on top of the 27 million that lacked health insurance prior to the current situation. That's somewhere between 40 and 60 million people in this country without health insurance. The U.S. is the only first world country without job-based mandatory health care. Consequently, when employment ends, health care ends soon thereafter. Of course, your employer must offer you the chance at keeping it going through COBRA, but few can afford the sky-high costs associated with that option after having just lost a job. And the Affordable Care Act isn't very affordable either, and even if it was, the current administration is trying every means possible to have it erased. A little-known fact is that when the CARES Act was being written in March, a provision to have paid sick leave for every American was at one point in the bill. But the very notion that corporations would have to pay for such a thing brought hordes of lobbyists to the halls of Congress, and the provision was quickly removed from the final language of the bill. In fact, studies show that the top 1/5 of income earners in this country can expect to live 13 years longer than the bottom 1/5. Indeed, wealth inequality has now become health inequality. All of that in a country that spends more on healthcare than any other country on the planet. It has a life expectancy years behind others. We'll be right back with some other headlines. Publicly traded companies have received more than $1 billion in funds meant for small businesses from the federal government's economic stimulus package. Nearly 300 public companies have received money from the Paycheck Protection Program, including 43 companies with more than 500 workers, which was supposed to be the maximum allowed by the program. Now, several of these companies paid executives $2 million or more a year. After the first pool of money totaling $349 billion ran dry, outrage over the millions that went to the larger firms prompted some companies to return the money. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin has defended the program as a success. Staying with small business, the small business loans, the SBA has now limited the loan limit for stressed businesses from $2 million to $150,000. This is a separate program from the one I just spoke about. But with the change, it has effectively shuttered a program by changing the rules under which millions of small businesses have just applied for loans, thus causing more stress on these businesses who are desperately trying to do the right thing by keeping workers on the payroll. Why the change? Key Republican senators want to shift the priority to small farmers and agricultural businesses. The last time I checked, cows didn't get paychecks. And yes, Steven Mnuchin defended the program. Sticking with the Treasury Department, turns out the CARES Act had a little something for wealthy individuals and big companies. Tax breaks. Well, more like the return of tax breaks that the administration gave to the wealthy during the 2017 tax cut package. You remember that and trickle down? Tax breaks so egregious that Washington saw fit to rein them in a little with an election cycle coming. Now that was until the current economic crisis hit and DC thought they'd sort of just forget about doing that. It has absolutely nothing to do with the virus pandemic and everything to do with the ability to increase the write-offs for depreciation on certain assets, sometimes called paper losses. And while it does not target any specific types of assets, real estate investors are usually the group most known to take advantage of these provisions in the tax law. I'll be right back with some thoughts on universal basic income. As many of you know, I've been appearing on lots of radio talk shows as a guest the last couple of months, and one question continues to come up. Several of the hosts have asked me what I think about universal basic income, or UBI. Well, let's begin with what that is exactly. Here's the way it's defined by the International Monetary Fund. An income support mechanism in which regular cash payments are intended to reach all or a very large portion of the population with no conditions. No conditions. Draw me a world where Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell can reach an agreement on that. The fact is that until we can define UBI, we need to have a Congress that can come to an agreement on something other than giving itself a pay raise and unlimited terms in office. The estimated costs of giving everyone in the United States $1,000 a month, which, by the way, seems to be the accepted amount everyone is talking about, would be 2 times the cost of Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid combined. Twice that cost. A staggering amount of taxpayer money coming out of the Treasury, to say the least. But, and listen to this, because this is really important. Tell me this isn't a coincidence. Strangely enough, if individual income had kept pace with overall economic growth since 1970, Americans at the bottom 90% of the income distribution ladder would be making $12,000 more a year than they are today. Now that's a familiar figure. 12,000 is the number the UBI proponents are pushing. The key here is that Americans haven't shared in the wealth of their employers since 1970. There are many factors why, but one very important factor is that unions fight for a fair share of economic growth at companies, and that no longer exists for the most part. Individuals can't do it. So what the wealthiest in our nation are advocating is that the lost wages be replaced with a government giveaway. That, ladies and gentlemen, is corporate welfare at its finest. You see, we already have a UBI, and it's called minimum wage. If minimum wage were indexed to where it was in 1968, it would be paying somewhere between $20 and $25 an hour. And don't tell me that's a wage for teenagers. Congress didn't enact a law to make sure paperboys and babysitters made enough spending money for the mall. And also don't tell me that jobs would disappear because businesses can't afford to pay minimum wage. That argument has been repeatedly refuted in cities like Seattle and New York, where the $15 minimum wage has been instituted. Starting pay in Denmark for an employee who works at McDonald's is $22 an hour, and it comes with benefits. Those workers work one job. They know their schedules a month in advance. They take family vacations. They afford rent and housing and save for college. Health insurance is provided. I know Denmark is small, correct, which means they sell less Big Macs. It's proportional. We're bigger, so we sell more burgers. So get over that argument too. You tell whoever is arguing this with you. Where there will be a need for basic income will be as we see current jobs replaced with artificial intelligence, something we are poised to begin experiencing very quickly, and possibly even now is accelerated because of the current financial situation. AI will mean a shift in jobs, and that will require training. That training should be paid for by corporations paying into a trust fund. And those training workers will need a guarantee of basic family health care and a monthly cash stipend, basic income, in order to make ends meet until they are trained and placed into new jobs. In a world where most families don't have $400 saved for an emergency, that type of a guaranteed basic income would allow workers and their families to get along without worry and be able to concentrate on learning new skills. But it will take leadership and forward thinking on the part of political and corporate leaders to make that happen. And it will take new minimum wage laws, and it will take stronger labor unions and leaders of labor unions to act as a countervailing voice for capitalism unchecked, including sexual bargaining, which we'll talk about next week on Labor This Week. I'm Mark Harrison, and I'll see you then.